Welcome to Human Resources for Small Business, where we discuss HR best practice, hot topics in HR strategy, and employment law changes that affect business. I'm your host, Brandon Laws of Xenium HR. Our website is www.xeniumhr.com, where you can follow us, read articles, watch videos, or contact us. Thank you for listening. I'd like to welcome to the show today Kirsten Solis. She is a senior human resource representative at Xenium. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So today our topic is on the I-9 form. So first question for you, Kirsten, what is the I-9 form? And for an employer, what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the I-9 form is a government form that employers are required to obtain in those records. What it does is it verifies the employee's identity and basically in their ability to work in the United States. So we usually, workers for U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents or non-immigrants with work authorizations or alien students with work authorizations are allowed to work in the United States. So you're just verifying that.
Does the form actually ever expire?
It does. So there is an expiration date. So the expiration date is usually in the right-hand corner up on the top of the document. The current I-9 right now is actually expired. So it expired in August 31st, 2012. So
this is good timing then.
It is good. It is good timing. So what you would do now is you would still continue to use the form because a new form hasn't been issued yet. But I'm sure as soon as a new form is issued, Xenium will definitely send that out, and there will be updates to the new form. And the new form is actually looking like it's going to be a lot different than the new form. It might turn into 2 pages instead of 1, so there's a lot changing on that front.
Probably a lot of training to go along with it. So
yes.
What we'll do here after we'll post this podcast is that we'll actually put a form up of the current form and then provide some updates as maybe the new form will come out and anything legal related that we hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why exactly do employers actually need the I-9 form besides the citizen verification? Do they need it on file all the time?
Yes, absolutely. So employers are required to keep the I-9 on file. What we like to recommend is that you keep it all your 9s together in one place. So we recommend to keep it in a drawer that preferably has a lock somewhere outside, not in the personnel file. So a separate folder for all your employees, all the I-9s go into that file.
Why are they separate? Why not in the employee file?
Because it has confidential information on the I-9. So, that's basically the reason. You want to protect your employees and that information that they give you on the I-9. So it has date of birth, social security number, it has everything on there to verify that you're able to work in the United States. So you want to keep it separate and you want to make sure it doesn't get in the wrong hands or somebody's not going through your drawers. You don't want that information easily to be discovered or to, an employee to take out a file on accident. You want that separate and locked.
And so how long do you keep it on file? So let's say there's a long-standing employee and they filled it out 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Do you keep that in a certain active file or in a mixture of terminated employees and past employees, all that?
So that's a good question. So what we recommend is keeping all your active employee I-9s in an active employee I-9 file. So you can pull terminated employees I-9s, which you can, but you have to be careful. So you have to keep an I-9 for 3 years or 1 year after an employee is terminated. So depending when they terminate it, you might have to, so if they're employed for you for 1 year, you have to keep that I-9 form for 3 years. So separate file, completely fine, away, locked still, secured, but it doesn't have to be with your active files. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's one way after the period of holding on to them, how do you purge them?
You purge them, shred.
You definitely don't want to be throwing them away in a trash can where somebody can access the file because of that important information that's on that document.
Exactly. We recommend in a shredder. Somebody, a lot of companies or organizations have people come out, companies that are focused on shredding confidential documents, just make sure it's shredded.
So Kirsten, you mentioned storing the paper files, but what about storing electronically? Is that an option for employers?
Yes, it's absolutely an option. If you are going to store your I-9s electronically, there's a lot of things that you need to do to ensure that there's proper controls in place. Some examples of that, you need to make sure that there's controls in place to prevent accidental deletion of a file or anything that could potentially be altered of the I-9 file. What you also need to look for is make sure there's password settings, make sure the folders are locked and secure. And what you need to do is make sure you have a quality assurance program in place that evaluates your electronic storage system. So there's a lot that goes into if you're going to save your files electronically, but you can certainly do that.
One point of clarification, I-9 form is only for employees only and not for contractors. Is that correct?
Correct. You do not want an I-9 on an independent contractor. You're treating them as their employee. I-9 forms are for employees only, not independent contractors.
Because the liability is on the employer at
that point. Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay, so in verifying citizenship, and on the form it outlines this pretty well, what sort of forms of ID can employees use? And I know on the form, list A, B, and C, kind of explain that and how actually you should be filling out the form.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, there's list A, list B, and list C. What employees can do is they could provide documentation just in list A. If they do that, they just need to provide either a passport, there's a permanent resident alien card, and actually on the I-9, that this list should be available to the employees. And what we recommend is actually showing them that list. We're not asking for the documentations. We're telling them, what do you have out of these lists that we could use for the I-9? So you never want to say, hey, provide us our driver's license or our social security card. You want to give the employee that option. So in list A, one of those options is a passport or a permanent resident card, a foreign passport that contains a temporary, what they like to call a 1551 stamp or temporary 1551 printed notification, an employment authorization document, anything like this will do for list A. List B and C, this is where the end statement comes in. So you need something for list B and list C.
Okay, so two things. Two things,
okay. Yeah. List A, one thing. List B and C, you need to provide two documents.
And that's probably why it's important that you give them this document ahead of time, I assume, because they'll need to prepare these things. So if they have something from list A, then they're taken care of. But what happens if they come to the meeting to sign this document and they only have one item from list B? Then you basically don't get a chance to fill out the entire form.
Exactly. You what you'll need to do is you actually need them to come back with something from list B and C or something from just list A. And you leave that on to the employee to decide what they want to bring.
Where is this list published? Is it on the back side of the I-9 form? Is it a supplement?
Yeah, so it should be on the back of the I-9 form. If it's not double-sided, it should be the next page after the I-9 form. But what it's called is the list of acceptable documents. So that should be with the I-9.
As a hiring manager or a human resource person who is actually helping the employee fill out this form, how do you distinguish between real and fake documents?
That's a really good question.
And probably a tough question to answer.
It's absolutely a tough question to answer because it's hard to tell. I think the things that you need to look for is the texture of the document. You also look for the thickness of the document. A couple other things you want to look for is the font. Is the font a little bit bigger than what you normally would see? Is it smaller? Sometimes the documents could be discolored a little bit or colors that aren't really recognized or you just don't see a lot. So that could also be a sign of fake identification. you also kind of want to look at for misspellings. There could be some misspellings or errors in grammar and punctuation. Also spacing within the letters. And I mean, all this is really hard to tell because, we're not staring at our social security cards every day. But I mean, it is, these are a couple things to be aware of when you are looking at.
So for like a new hiring manager or maybe an HR person who's relatively new to this sort of thing, how do you... I mean, you're not exposed to these documents all the time. There's so many on this list as we're looking at the form here. So how do you, as a hiring manager, how do you figure out ways to know, or how do you know what a standard document looks like? Are there resources on certain websites you can look at and then be able to kind of cross-reference between what's real and what's fake? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of resources to look at. I mean, Google is always a good option, but I mean, some government websites are the USCIS. They have outlined, which is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So that's a great site. So I would recommend going on there. They also offer free webinars to go on, and you could look at the webinars. And it has ways of completing the I-9, fake documentation, what to keep an eye out for. Also, the Xenium website is a great resource. We have a couple great articles and blogs that you could take a look at as well.
So we'll put links up to all those things, especially the government website.
Absolutely.
Post a link to the webinars. That way listeners can get an idea how to identify the fake forms and all that. So here's a question for you, and this is kind of subjective, but what are the most common mistakes that you see? You personally, you see a lot of I-9s through the Xenium client base.
Absolutely.
But what are the most common mistakes that you've seen employers make?
I think employers, what they forget to do is they actually, they forget to look over the I-9. They forget to look to make sure that the employee fill out everything in the employee section. They don't go through it and make sure all the boxes are checked. On the current I-9 form, there's 4 boxes, and sometimes those, they just they forget to check a box. Also, the employee's signature, the date of birth, sometimes they forget to sign, the date of the document, the employee's signature or the date. They forget to date the form. I think that's a common mistake. Going back to the lists, I think that's also another common mistake. People or employers will sometimes put a driver's license in list A, when driver's license are solely supposed to only go in list B.
And so they think they've met the requirements.
Exactly.
And then in all fairness, the document's actually filled out completely wrong.
Correct.
And most of the time, do they even know about it?
No. I mean, obviously because I don't think anybody does it intentionally.
Yeah, so it's just in their
one
file
of those things.
It's filled out incorrectly. So here, it leads into my next question is, once these are filled out wrong, maybe without their knowing, what could happen at that point? I mean, could somebody audit them? Are there penalties, fines? What sort of things are we looking at here?
Both. So yes, there are audits.
Does everybody receive an audit?
No.
Okay.
Not everybody will receive an audit. Usually audits, obviously it's all going to depend, but usually audits are kind of, what's the word?
Random or
they're random. Well, I don't want to say random. Are usually what will happen is the government will get a tip, basically, maybe that an employer has illegal employees. So that's kind of where you'll see the audits come in. I mean, audits can also be random too, but I think just in the past couple years, and that's what they were really trying to come down on the I-9s and actually on immigration a little bit. So there was a lot more audits than we typically usually see. So, I mean, that's your risk. There are penalties and fines for every error you make on the I-9.
Now, what kind of fines are you talking about? So if let's say you forgot to check a box, what's the maximum fine for that?
There's a dollar amount associated with that. I don't know off the top of my head what that dollar amount. I do not want to know what that dollar amount is, but there is certainly a dollar amount associated each error on the I-9 form.
Yeah. Well, good. So what other things should listeners know with the I-9 form? We talked about how there may be a new form coming out, so we'll definitely keep people updated on that. But what are some good resources besides the government website you listed, and where can people learn more?
Definitely, obviously, go onto the government website and take a look at the new form that's coming on. There's a lot of blogs out there right now that the new I-9 form is actually becoming quite the debate because they are moving to potentially a 2-page document. So, with that said, a 2-page document, there's going to be a lot of, for everyone that uses electronic I-9s, there's going to be a huge system upgrade for that as well. So, there's going to be a lot coming down if the new I-9 form is actually going to be a 2-page document. That'll
be interesting to see the developments on that. But here's another question that I really didn't ask before. With this new form, does that mean employers actually have to go back with all of their existing employees and redo the I-9 form?
No. You would not have to go back. Yes, your
I-9
form. So
it's just going forward.
Absolutely, just going forward.
Our guest today has been Kirsten Solis. Thanks for being part of our show.
Thank you, Brandon.
This podcast is produced by Xenium Resources, Inc., all rights reserved. For information on guests or for interview requests, please visit www.xeniumhr.com or email info@xeniumhr.com. Everything on this show should be considered educational and informational only, and not personal advice. Please consult with the appropriate tax, legal, or business professional for individualized advice.